On our broadcast tonight, 1 month since Korea's worst maritime accident in decades, the investigation into the ferry operator's de facto owner takes a turn, and the president sits down with the victims' families. The U.S.-China differences over territorial disputes in Northeast Asia are on sharp display. Disputes that are now boiling over into deadly violence. And candidate registrations for the June 4th local elections wrap up on this Friday. Voter turnout will play a critical role in the outcome. Early edition begins now.
I see trees of green, red
늘 남편 먼저,
I see them
늘 자식 먼저.
for me and
레이디 퍼스트라는 말을 믿고 살아온 당신. 오늘만큼은 세상 누구보다 당신이 먼저입니다.
한 분 한 분 특별하게 모시겠습니다.
Excellence in Flight, Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in New York, 4 p.m. in Bangkok, and 6 on a Friday evening here in Seoul. This is Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gun-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us.
It was this time 1 month ago that we started learning the true extent of the horror unfolding off Korea's southwestern coast as a ferry with hundreds on board capsized.
Fast forward to today, nearly 300 dead and 20 still missing. Investigators are zeroing in on who should be held responsible for the disaster. Prosecutors want to talk to the practical owner of the sunken Seoul ferry about his possible role in the disaster and called him in for questioning earlier this Friday morning.
But Yoo Byung-eun was a no-show, and now the authorities are considering more forceful ways to bring him in. Arirang News' Kim Ji-yeon starts us off.
Prosecutors have requested an arrest warrant for the de facto owner of the sunken Seoul ferry, Yoo Byung-eun, after he failed to show up for questioning earlier Friday over his alleged role in the ferry disaster. Yoo is believed to be holed up inside a religious compound in Anseong, Gyeonggi-do province, and authorities are reportedly considering using force to get inside. But around 800 members of a cult led by Yoo have surrounded the estate in protest of authorities who they claim are violating their religious freedoms. Prosecutors say their investigation has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with the business irregularities of Yoo and his family, which may have led to the ferry sinking. Yoo is suspected of embezzling funds worth millions of dollars from company affiliates owned by the Yoo family, including the operator of the Seoul ferry, Cheonghaejin Marine Company. Investigations point to negligence on the part of the ferry operator as playing a big part in the ferry accident, namely an overloading of cargo onto the ferry for the sake of profits. The 73-year-old was summoned to appear for questioning at 10 a.m. Friday local time, but he did not appear, like his other family members who have ignored similar orders. The district court in Incheon is set to rule on the prosecution's request for an arrest warrant for Yoo Byung-eun next Tuesday. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And President Park Geun-hye has apologized to the families of the Seoul ferry victims for the government's insufficient emergency response to the tragedy.
During the talks with representatives of the families at the presidential office Friday, President Park consoled them and promised to revamp the nation's safety systems to ensure that the victims did not die in vain. She also asked the families about their concerns and needs. The meeting came after some families had marched towards the presidential office last week to demand talks with the president. President Park is expected to address the entire nation as early as next week to apologize for the government's failure to prevent the ferry tragedy.
And this just coming in, families of the victims who met with the president are holding a press conference starting about 10 minutes ago in front of the presidential office. And family representatives said that the group was made up of 17 people, including parents of the school children who perished in the ferry accident. And they are making clear to the press what they demanded to the president and what the response was to that. And we'll have more on the details of that in our later newscasts. Now, 1 month since the ferry tragedy that's left more than 300 people either dead or missing, this country is in a state of shock over the scale, the gravity, the devastation of the accident.
The feelings of anger, frustration, helplessness, and grief have hit us all here in Korea and the world as questions about how this terrible accident could have occurred remain unanswered still.
It's what's called a collective trauma, says our Park Ji-won. She joins us live from the news center to tell us more about what it is that we are going through. Ji-won, I think each and every one of us have been touched by this tragedy in one way or another.
Hey, good evening, guys. You're right. Everyone here in Korea was touched by this tragedy. As more revelations about the ongoing investigation come out, Koreans grow even more outraged. They say they feel like they've lost a loved one of their own.
It's too bad that those young lives could have lived, but they had to die. It's too sad and too heartaching. How deplorable their parents must be. During the past month, I cried every time I watched TV reports.
It's been a month, but my anger about the tragedy hasn't gone down. Seeing how everything has turned out over the past month, I now have doubts about whether the whole social system can be changed, even if we citizens raise our voices. Helplessness and mistrust have followed the anger.
I have abstained from many things in mourning for the victims. I've kept myself away from some social outings and leisure activities, and other people seem to be doing the same.
And the citizens I talked to said they were feeling frustration, distrust, and even shame to be a Korean, as they couldn't imagine such a senseless disaster happening here.
And Ji-won, those feelings have been reflected on the consumer sentiment we're seeing.
Yes, the Korea Institute of Finance, for example, made a downward adjustment of its economic projection, down 0.1% from an earlier outlook. And according to finance research firm FN Guide this week, more than half of Korea's major companies downgraded their market prospects for the second quarter.
Well, obviously, we're all grieving in one form or another. Many of us have feelings we don't quite know how to address. So how should we, Ji-won, as Koreans, be coping with the tragedy and our feelings?
Well, so I asked the doctor that very question, and this is what she had to say.
If you're suffering from insomnia and constant crying, you need to stay away from social networking sites and news reports. However, it's not easy to do that since we as adults feel responsible for the accident. Then it becomes fight or flight. If you can't avoid the issue, you can take proactive steps like doing volunteer work, something that gives back to society.
And as you might imagine, the dangers are much greater for families of the victims. They are at risk of depression, dissolution of families, and even suicide. So she urges everyone to reach out a helping hand to them.
Now, Ji-won, another aspect of this tragedy raises questions about the nation's safety. We've had a series of safety disasters in recent months, such as the deaths of 10 people in the collapse of an auditorium in Gyeongju earlier this year. And also a subway collision not too long ago, just about a few weeks ago.
Yes, so they've got all people asking aloud whether it's safe to live in Korea. Well, experts point out that the lack of effective systems to prevent such accidents is a key concern. The lack of effective rescue control tower and the lack of related rules are often mentioned. And even if there are regulations in place, many are ignored by the people and by the authorities. And one of the experts also stressed the importance of safety education to improve safety awareness among Koreans.
Systemic shortfalls, problems within administrative bodies, a lack of safety education, these were big parts of the tragedy. For example, students of the Sewol ferry had no clue what to do when faced with such an emergency. That's why they relied so heavily on the announcements. And it's not just the students. The teachers never had any safety education until the day they became teachers. In advanced countries, when large field trips are planned, the first focus is on safety measures and safety plans.
You know, Koreans, when it comes crunch time, they know how to step it up and really deliver. But somehow when it comes to drills or rehearsals, we are not really very, I guess, supportive or very voluntary when it comes to those kind of moves. We've had some drills in certain big buildings recently with safety-related issues, and people weren't really cooperative, apparently, I heard, so we need to change that mindset quickly. But still, if you look at Korea, we have transformed pretty quickly from the remains of the Korean War to a booming economy, and some say such strong emphasis that's been placed on economic growth in the past few decades did play a role in these disasters.
Yes, many experts point out Korea's rapid economic growth came at the expense of safety measures as people try to cut corners to save time and money. As an OECD report shows, Korea now is the world's 15th largest GDP and one of the highest education levels. However, the nation still has one of the lowest levels of spending on social welfare programs and the highest suicide rate among OECD countries. And these all are great reminders that this should be a time of reflection on making this community a safe place to live for everyone.
Right, definitely. I mean, we as a nation should get to the bottom of this accident, learn from it, and rise to make this place a better place to live for us as well as our children as well. And of course, marking this 1 month since the ferry capsized, we have a message for all of those families and those who have been affected by the ferry disaster. We're all in this together. All right, Jiwon, thank you so much for that report.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life, talking with you on air and online, connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Let's turn our attention to the upcoming local elections now. Voter turnout is going to play a critical role in the outcome of the polls. With Korea in a state of mourning over the ferry disaster, campaigning will be low-key, leading some to worry fewer people will feel inclined to vote. Now, if it plays out like that, the ruling party could be in for a torrid time on June 4th. Kim Young-gil has a breakdown.
All candidates vying for seats in the June 4th local elections have now made their candidacies official. Registration for the 3,952 positions for grabs ended Friday for the local positions that range from mayoral and provincial governor posts to councillors and ward members. The municipal elections will be viewed as a first chance to judge the current Park Geun-hye administration, and voter turnout will be a key factor in determining which political party wins. According to a February survey conducted by the polling organization Research Plus, 84% of respondents said they would vote or try to vote on June 4th. In a follow-up survey conducted this week, respondents were asked if the Seoul ferry disaster had affected their determination to vote. 35.2% said it had, 21.1% said it hadn't. Meanwhile, an increase in independent voters could also play a critical role on election day. A survey conducted by Embrain suggests that of all voters on election day, 43.8% of them will be people with no party affiliation. Their perception of the job President Park Geun-hye has done over the past year could make a difference, and last month's ferry tragedy looms large. A survey by Gallup Korea shows that the president's approval ratings among women in their 40s was 62% on April 4th before the ferry disaster. On May 2nd, 2 weeks after the accident, the figure had dropped 20 percentage points to 42%. Experts say it reflects the maternal instinct of women in their 40s who have children the same age as those who perished on the Seoul ferry. There is speculation that candidates of the ruling Henry Party will take a beating on June 4th. Analysts aren't as sure. If the distrust in government keeps people away from the polls, they say, and the turnout falls below 40%, the ruling party could gain an upper hand. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
And amid escalating concerns that North Korea will carry out a fourth nuclear test soon, China's foreign minister may be coming to South Korea. A government source said Wang Yi is likely to arrive in Seoul later this month for a three-day visit that would include talks with President Park Geun-hye and Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se. Now, the leaders are expected to reaffirm their joint stance on the North nuclear program in that it poses a threat to the regional security. The Chinese foreign minister will discuss plans for a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping, who has yet to visit the peninsula since taking office last year.
The anti-China protests in Vietnam are spreading and becoming increasingly violent. The latest reports have at least 21 people being killed in rioting on Wednesday evening, including 5 Vietnamese workers and 16 others who are believed to be Chinese, although the numbers are under dispute. The unrest began earlier this week at a steel mill in central Vietnam with protests against a Chinese oil rig that has been deployed in an area of the South China Sea claimed by both Vietnam and China. Beijing vowed Thursday it would continue to drill for oil at the rig, while Hanoi has demanded its removal, sending ships to the area in response. Now, despite violent protests in Vietnam, China isn't backing down from its plans of stationing an oil rig in the South China Sea. A top Chinese military official on a visit to the United States said oil drilling will continue in disputed waters, and he had words for Hanoi and Washington as well. Our Chae Yu-sun has more.
After meeting with his U.S. counterpart General Martin Dempsey at the Pentagon Thursday, the chief of the General Staff of the Chinese People's Liberation Army said he will continue drilling for oil in disputed waters. He said they belong to China and that the nation couldn't afford to lose an inch of its territory. Blaming Hanoi for disrupting Sino-Vietnam relations by sending ships to the area, the Chinese general also had a message for Washington.
I would like to also express hope that the United States can hold an objective view on the issues in the South China and East China Seas.
Fang also criticized U.S. President Barack Obama's strategic military rebalancing in Asia for giving some countries in the region leverage to make territorial claims in the seas. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during the talks said the so-called pivot to Asia was necessary to protecting regional peace and stability amid mounting security threats from North Korea.
We also discussed the tensions in the South China Sea and how provocative actions can lead to confrontation. These issues need to be resolved through dialogue and international law.
Since the arrival of the Chinese oil rig in waters near the disputed Paracel Islands earlier this month, Beijing and Hanoi have each sent vessels to surround it. The Chinese foreign minister spoke with the Vietnamese deputy prime minister Thursday, urging Hanoi to take measures to protect the safety of Chinese nationals and companies in Vietnam. Chae Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Well, the unrest in Thailand continues. Reports say explosions and shooting attacks on anti-government demonstrators have killed at least 3 people this week, bringing the toll to at least 28 since last November. Its election commission has called off new elections initially scheduled for July 20th due to the continued political turmoil.
The country's powerful army, meanwhile, has warned that it may need to deploy troops if the violence escalates. The crisis deepened last week when the Constitutional Court removed Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra for nepotism in a case that many viewed as politically motivated.
Right, let's get a clearer picture of the situation there and long-term implications. For that, we are joined live via Skype by Jade Donavanik, Dean of the Graduate School of Law at Siam University in Bangkok. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
First off, give us some context in the now 7-month-long anti-government protest. What is it that the Thai people want? Now that Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has been ousted, will we see an end to this political turmoil anytime soon?
Well, actually, the mainstream and the public at large, the majority of the Thai people would want peace. Anything but peace. And whatever that brings peace, then the majority of the Thai people would be happy to have that. So if peace would come through election, that's fine. If peace does not come through election, that's also fine. At this moment, it's the only peace that the Thai people are looking for, even the ousting of Prime Minister Yingluck, is nothing important to the Thai public at large because it didn't really bring any peace to the country. So what the country needs right now is that we have to hold a dialogue, or we have to be able to talk and get way to peace. And that's what the public wants.
Well, Professor, Thailand's prolonged political crisis is raising the risk that the nation will be the only one of Southeast Asia's biggest economies to slide into a recession this year. What is the public sentiment there? Are there concerns that they need to clean this up quickly so as not to damage the economy?
Yes, the public is really, really concerned. And that is why I was saying that with or without the election, if the country can come to peace, that's what the public want. So this is the main concern. Our economy is coming bad. Our society is moving in discrepancy between each other. A talk cannot be done. And we don't really know what democracy means in the country. And the manner of our politicians has not been shown that they have integrity and they can still bring the country to peace.
So basically, it doesn't look like this will be ending anytime soon. However, peace is what the Thai public wants. All right, Jay Donovanik, Dean of the Graduate School of Law at Siam University, live from Bangkok. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Meanwhile, the sorrow and anger in Turkey is palpable. 4 days after an explosion at a mine, there is no news of any survivors.
The death toll now stands at 284. And at least 140 others are believed to be trapped inside. While the dead are being buried, protests against the government are breaking out across the country. Our Kwon So-wha reports.
As the death toll from the worst mining accident in Turkey's history moves closer to 300, a wave of sorrow and anger is sweeping the country. The first funerals of victims were held in a local cemetery near the accident site as excavators were digging new graves. The whole nation is in mourning, and the outrage against the government is growing over its indifference to poor safety conditions.
The company calls the inspectors and they come. The mining company shuts down the shaft they work in, tells the inspectors it's not being used, and that's it. Once the inspectors are gone, they reopen that shaft. They should hold inspections unannounced.
Thousands of Turkey's major trade unions have joined in a 24-hour strike, and clashes broke out in the country's third-largest city of Izmir, 120 kilometers from Soma, where the ill-fated mine is located. Police used water cannons and tear gas to break up demonstrations. A union boss there was said to have been hospitalized. Newly released images are also fueling the outrage. A photo of one of Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's aides kicking a protester as he's being held down by Special Forces police triggered a firestorm of anti-government sentiments. Local newspapers published the picture, citing him as a deputy chief of staff, and reported that the incident began when the protester had kicked a vehicle in Erdogan's convoy on Wednesday. The disaster has given fuel to an already outraged segment of the Turkish population, upset over corruption allegations surrounding the prime minister and those closest to him. Prime Minister Erdogan earlier tried to defend his government by pointing out that such disasters occur everywhere. Meanwhile, Turkey's President Abdullah Gül visited Soma on Thursday and said the mine tragedy is a sorrow for the whole Turkish nation. Rescue efforts continue, but as the days pass, the hope for finding any survivors is gradually fading. Kwon So-wha, Arirang News.
Two very different headlines in India, the end or a new beginning, depending on where you stand.
The nation's ruling party has held a firm grip on power for a decade, but it conceded defeat in general elections today, paving the way for the opposition BJP to step in. Arirang News, Kim Hyun-bin reports.
The ruling Indian National Congress admitted defeat on Friday. On the first day votes started being counted, the more than 550 million votes cast in general elections. The Hindu nationalist opposition BJP party and its leader Narendra Modi are poised for a landslide victory. The final results aren't expected until later Friday, but the early indicators suggest the BJP is well on course to secure the 272 seats needed for a parliamentary majority. It sets the stage for Modi to become the nation's next prime minister. And analysts say he'll be entering with the strongest mandate of any Indian leader since 1984. BJP supporters celebrated outside of the headquarters in New Delhi on hearing the news, banging drums and waving flags. Betting on Modi's win, foreign investors have poured in more than $16 billion into Indian stocks and bonds over the past 6 months, holding over 22% of Mumbai-listed equities. Morgan Stanley estimates currently more than $280 billion of foreign investments are in the market. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Let's talk about weather. Gorgeous was the word to describe the nation's capital today.
Right, weather-wise. Let's get a check on the weather with our Michelle Park for the rest of the day and, of course, the weekend. Michelle?
Well, good evening. Now, I must say today felt more like summer than spring, but make sure to keep in mind that temperatures are going to drop more than 8 degrees as we progress into the night. Now, our weekend is also looking very favorable with mostly clear skies and similar daytime highs of up to 30s. Now, it'll be sunny, but watch out for the UV levels as they are expected to be high as well, so make sure to apply some sunblock when you are heading out. Now, going over to our temperature readings, Seoul will start off the morning at 12, going over to 26 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will peak up to 30 and 26 degrees. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island tops out at 23, Dokdo at 18, while Mangkumgang tops out at 16. Now, as for the weather conditions down in Chindo, the skies are clear, but from today until Sunday, we are expecting the fastest tide of the year at a speed of 2.8 meters per second, complicating the search efforts underwater. Well, that's all I have at this moment. I'm Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Ganyang. To those of you in other parts of the world, have a great start to your day and a great weekend to all of you. We hope to see you right back here, same time, Monday evening. Take care.